Okay. Very rainy today. So here is coming up to the time of year in Northern Ireland where there's a Protestant celebration where they construct these enormous bonfires made of like wooden pallets. So there are like hundreds of them around the country, and they have like they pretty much have like an all-night party around the bonfire. When I say bonfire, I mean like to the of proportions that you wouldn't believe. Like one in particular, it was a world record, and you'd need to see the size of it to appreciate how absolutely enormous it is. They even have to bring in engineers and architects to help with the construction, because the build is that complicated. Like is that well built of a structure that it requires professionals to put it together. But it's if anyone doesn't know that the sectarianism is quite divisive here, particularly between the Catholics and the Protestants. So it's still very visually obvious and socially obvious, that duality within the same faith. Quite interesting. So I wanted to talk about how there are tendencies, habitual or habituated tendencies that continue on post-realization. And it seems that there is momentum involved. There's a momentum there that is powerful. It's like a habituated process or function in thought, seemingly triggered by conditions and experience. And it's the remnants of the reality of the self made in the mind, the remnants of the thinker, the subject, the individual separate subject, that have like accrued a momentum kind of like an energetic pattern that plays out automatically. And with the realization of with realization comes the relinquishment, or I wouldn't say relinquishment, the obvious recognition of the absence of the thinker in the way that it was believed to be real before. Is in that belief, that function, the belief in the reality of the separate subject, the me, the discrete entity that is here inside the head and thinks, relates to an outer world. The belief is completely being seen through, isn't believable anymore. The illusion has been broken, you could say. But the patterns that are based upon that illusion still continue to express for a long time. Sorry, I'm gonna have to quickly run out here and I'll be back. Alright, so sorry, what was I saying? So there seems to be these habitual patterns, largely in thought, that are only relevant from the point of view of a real separate subjective experience, a real thinking central self. And even when that's clearly seen to not be there in experience, really not be there in experience, when that's clearly illusory. Language is limited with this, of course, but these tendencies still play out, and most of that seems to be in the surfacing and expression of emotion. These emotions seem to be almost like held together into a narrative, into a story, in relation to that real character. So there appears emotion, for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter. The reason would be then imputed onto that with meaning, with belief, with reality, from a point of view as I relate to it, as a real me. The tendency for these thought patterns to surface, they appear, but they don't hold the same pull, they don't hold the same persuasive or alluring power that they did when the character felt real, or was really believed to be the primary basis of experience as a me, as a self. So in the surfacing of those emotions, there's then the chance for the emotional experience, or the sensation of emotion, the feeling, the sensory experience, including emotion, to then untangle itself from the relational narrative about it as it relates to me. And that's quite a strange place to be, because with no narrative, or with no strong belief in a narrative as it appears. There's just thought. There's no longer the illusion that there's anything to be done about it, or no longer the labeling and categorization regarding is this experience bad, is this experience good. These thoughts still appear as a tendency, as a habit force, as a pattern, but it's clear it's just movements in thought. It's just thought. There's no real back and forth relational dialogue there that's believable. So these reactions still continue to happen based on conditions, based on movements and experience and the environment interacting with itself. The emotions still surface, seemingly sometimes from nowhere for no particular reason. But without that relational narrative holding it all together, they can't any longer be suppressed or congealed or restricted or repressed. So the sensory sensitivity to sensation increases an enormous amount. The deadening quality of relational thought narratives and the real identity in self is no longer there as a filter between experience and itself. So then there's just the full-on experience, and that's it. It's clear there's nothing that can be done to control that. There's no agent here that can think itself out of a problem. There's not even the illusion that there's a problem here in the first place. Yet this conditioning continues to express in emotion and in thought as that untangles. And that, you could say that's like it's a strange and uncomfortable place to be at times, because, you know, the realization is clear. It's no longer convincing, or the illusion is no longer convincing that, you know, I can have an insight or a realization and then that can then be completely obscured or lost due to my thoughts and behaviours and beliefs. The realization is clear, the realization is undoubtable, yet in spite of that, these patterns still continue to express and untangle themselves. So there can be some seemingly unspiritual behaviour, but then there's no longer the tendency to believe in that as a narrative. There's no longer a tendency to grab onto those narratives and run with them as if they're actually real. So again, that's why I try and talk about simplicity. Like, once this has been, realization has clarified, once that's been tasted, let's say, you then have access to the infinite number of ways in which the flavour of that can present itself as experience to itself, and then it becomes an exploration strangely from no point of view, like reality moving within itself, expressing, exploring itself inside itself, and with no outside, and all the different flavours and appearances and tones of that has been tasted. And once it's been tasted, it's just that all the way. It's that all the way, and it kind of does itself after that point. it just gets more and more simple. More and more, what's realised becomes more and more certain as itself, and the points of view become more and more obscure, and it gets clearer and clearer that these conventions, these relative narratives, or the conventions of the relative world we use to let's say, live in an illusion that seems stable, an illusion that it seems like we know what's going on. It seems like we know what this is. But even those conventions in themselves are obscure as anything, or weird and obscure anyway from the ultimate perspective, which isn't really a perspective. But so the cosmic question mark just gets more and more profound and more intriguing, and it's clear that there's less and less to do. When it's clear that everything is touching everything, like everything's touching everything in experience. Like my eyes right now are touching the Harland and Wolff cranes way over there across the water. It's touching, it's in contact, it's beyond close. Then there's nothing to go after that's out there, there's nothing else to get that's somewhere else or a something else. When I can hear the rain, and I'm touching the clouds, so to speak, then there's, what else is there to do? Where else is there to go? What else is there to get? So even like in thought, when my thought is touching that car over there, like that car is made of my this augmented convention made in mind. So simultaneously, it's so hard to describe, it's just like it just gets more and more simple and more mysterious, more and more fascinating, and the exploration just continues, the experience just continues experiencing itself without any distance or separateness or loneliness. And it's very much like an act of doing, an effort, the effort of engaging in that narrative, and the tension, the urgency, the suggestion of time, the strong implication of there is time, there is something to do, there's something else, this isn't complete. The signature of that in experience becomes more and more obvious, such that when it does, that tendency arises, that the act of that tendency of thought and identification arising disproves itself due to that signature, due to that felt sense of the apparent contrast between what's realised, the simplicity, the just there-ness, the immediacy, the completeness, the peace, the wholeness, compared to that fragmented, urgent, efforting process of engaging with that thought narrative. It just gets more and more uncomfortable and more obvious when it appears less and less believable. And it just dismantles itself after a while. So I don't know where I am now. I don't know where I started with this and what I was supposed to talk about. I had a vague idea, but I'm going to have to go now. But I'll talk to you next time.